Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. Monthly Report. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers McSwine.
We want to welcome everyone to the National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana Monthly Report. I'm your host, Lee Martin, and your co-host is Ms. Florence Myers McSwine. How are you doing today, Florence?
I'm doing well, thank you very much.
Okay, it's been a very busy week once again, and we have great guests today, and we have a lot of information to share with you. This is going to be a two-part series, so you want us to pay much attention to our guests as they share valuable information on how they transition their lives from blindness to a world of independence. So the program is centered around the National Federation of the Blind, Newsline. And for those of you that are interested in Newsline, it's an audible information service for those that are blind, visually impaired, and print challenged, those that have dyslexia, shaking hand syndromes, or just have a hard time with print. You can learn more about this free service as you have information that's scrolled and announced on the screen. So there's how to contact us at the National Federation of the Blind Newsline office here in Indianapolis, Indiana, as well as how to contact our Indianapolis affiliate. So their Indiana affiliate here in the state of Indiana, where our president is President Ronald Brown. So at this point in time, we want to share a little bit about accessing these services. Like we said, it's an audible information service where individuals that have lost their sight can have access to print. You know, blind people now have the opportunity to read print, and they have the opportunity to read print and use newspapers and as well as magazines. Florence, you want to talk a little bit about the magazines and stuff that we can reuse?
I certainly can. Okay, and as you may know, as some may not, there's over 60 magazines. We can start with AARP, and there's Stars and Stripes for those who are veterans or military lined.
Great magazine.
Yes,
Great one. Great.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's also magazines for people who are health conscious, people who love to cook. There's Best Recipes, Diabetic Forum. Goodness, there's just a lot of information there. There's every type of magazine for every type of situation, I believe.
Yeah, there's the financial magazines that we have on there, and a plethora of other things that I'm sure our guest Brian also will talk about and share some of his favorite publications as well. Also, there's newspapers, as Florence mentioned. There's over 400 newspapers right now. You can also receive international publications. I think there's about 15 international publications that you can read on a daily basis. Once again, this is a free service. One of the newspapers I love reading is my local newspaper. It's the Indianapolis Star. And there's also the Indianapolis Business Journal. There's other things such as TV guide listings, job listings for the youth. Students love to use the service because it helps them with their current events. So if you're blind or print challenged and you love to read and you love to keep up with current events, we have so many things on that publication that is very helpful. Such as breaking news. We love the breaking news segment, and that has publications all the way from the BBC to CNN, Fox News, Huffington Post, and on and on and on. Yes. So you can just find out all the different values of information as it's projected to you and to us as blind citizens and visually impaired citizens. So we're going to take us a break, and we'll be right back with our guests, Brian and Barbara. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss this segment from a Navy veteran and his wife. We'll be right back.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
Wow, I scored a touchdown when I found sports on NFB Newsline.
I enjoy reading TV guide listings on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind. We read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Welcome back to the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana Monthly Report. And today we have our guest. And Florence, you want to introduce our guest today?
I certainly would. I'd like to welcome our guests again, Mr. Brian Clark and his lovely wife, Miss Barbara Dush. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have a question for you, Mr. Clark. What branch of the service were you?
I was in the United States Navy.
In the United States Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And how many years did you serve?
I served 4 years, bridging from the late 1980s until the early 1990s.
Okay. And I'd like to thank you for your service, sir.
My pleasure.
And I wanted to find out from you, at what point were you in the military when you started losing your sight?
No, I maintained my vision until about 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
And with the when you started losing your sight, were you familiar at that time with any services that might assist you?
No, my vision went fairly quickly, pretty much over the course of 6 months, and I really did not have any idea of the sort of technology, things that can help blind people. I didn't really get introduced to a white cane until a couple years after being blind. I really felt my world kind of closing in on me. I can remember sitting in my garage and thinking that my prison was, or my blindness was a prison, and that I would never get to enjoy some of the things that I had enjoyed in my life up to that point. Just having fun and doing fun activities, working, being the provider for my family and things like that. It wasn't until I attended a state National Federation of the Blind event, the state annual conference last year, that my perception of blindness changed completely 180 degrees.
Wow, 180 degrees.
Yeah, I started to realize that our blindness isn't a handicap; it's just a nuisance. And being around people like yourself and Lee and other leaders in the NFB really showed me what is possible. That I can still enjoy a full life and do a lot of the things that I used to do. I just have to find different ways of doing it.
Yes, sir. Now, at what point were you introduced to NFB Newsline?
It was at that state convention nearly a year ago. There was a breakout session on one of the early days of the convention, and Lee came in, sat down and talked with us about NFB Newsline. And to be perfectly honest, it kind of all went over my head initially. But I was still very new to assistive technology. I had only had an iPhone for a couple months. I still hadn't even been introduced to text-to-speech, screen reader, JAWS, or anything like that that would allow you to use a computer. So, you know, I listened and I ended up getting signed up. And then I got the app, and as I started to become more familiar with the iPhone and become more comfortable with it, NFB Newsline was one of the apps that I started to use. And I don't necessarily use the call-in service or anything like that, but I use it on my phone quite a bit.
I was going to say, so I'm glad that you mentioned that, Brian, because you use the app, and there's a plethora of ways that people can use it. A lot of people aren't comfortable with the so-called new technology or high technology, as they want to call it. A lot of seniors, they still like to use the landline phone, and that's also how they can access the service as well. And then they also can access it through one of our sponsors, the Talking Book and Braille Library. They have a digital player that they can access NFB Newsline on. And then we also have what we call the Victor Reader Stream from Humanware. That's one of my favorites to use to access NFB Newsline. Once again, to our listening audience, listening and viewing audience, it is a free service here in the state of Indiana. And Brian, can I ask you, what was your diagnosis? Why, what was your sight loss?
It's due to diabetes.
Diabetes,
yeah. It got to the point where they were unable to control the bleeding into the eye, and then my retina's detached, and the blindness progressed from that. But diabetes.
So there's magazines and great reading. There's a diabetic forum that's in there. I trust that you can pull that up and get some great information from that, as well as Florence mentioned, Stars and Stripes.
Yep.
So you can keep up with what's going on in our armed forces. I think that's a great publication as well. So you recently went to a rehab center up in Hines, Chicago, for blinded veterans. You want to share a little bit of information on how you heard about that particular program and how it benefited you?
Sure, absolutely. It was about a year ago that I got introduced to the VA healthcare system. I had had private insurance for a while, and once I lost my job, I also lost my private insurance. So I turned to the VA for my healthcare needs, and there is a coordinator at the Indianapolis VA Hospital here in Indianapolis, and she's called the VIST coordinator. That stands for Visually Impaired Services Team. Her name is Deanna Austin. And she takes care of about 350 to 400 blind veterans in the state, and just makes sure that a lot of our needs are met. And I was in line at the time to attend BOSMA, the program here in Indianapolis, the nonprofit organization that deals with retraining blind people and teaching them different skills. But the VA has a little bit deeper pockets, to be honest. And Deanna convinced me to think about going up to the Hines Blind Rehab Center. And, once I thought about it and talked to you and I talked to some other veterans, I was convinced to go up there and try it. I was up there for about 12 weeks, and it was kind of like going back to school. We spent, I think, 7 to 8 hours a day going through classes, and we went into various classes like manual skills and living skills. We had mobility sessions where an instructor would walk us around and teach us how to use the white cam properly. We had different classes like that dealt with assistive technology, computers, and the iPhone, and different things like that.
And while you were there, as a subscriber to the NFB Newsline, you took the initiative to talk to other veterans about that service. You want to tell us how that went?
Yeah, Newsline is one of the things that I really think has reconnected me to the sighted world. You know, the iPhone is a powerful, powerful tool that allows us to do so many different things. We've got text-to-speech. JAWS is the program that I use on my computer that will read to me the things that are on the computer and allow me to use a computer again. And Newsline is one of those things that just adds to our ability to reconnect to the world. You know, I used to every day during my lunch hour at work, I would sit and I would pull up my favorite sports pages on the computer, and I would view local news and stay really connected to the world, and that was gone. So when I started to use Newsline again, you know, I just thought it was such a powerful tool. And so I kind of carried the message up to Heinz and tried to tell as many people as I can, just because I know that being able to access newspapers is really a big deal for a lot of people, whether it's sports or local events or just news in your home area. But by the same token, you can get newspapers from all over the country, and it's free to access them. So that's kind of neat. If your favorite sports team is located across the country, you can just read about them in the newspaper every day.
Okay, well, that's great news to know, and we'll be right back. We're going to share some more information with you about some of the travels of Brian and some of the interactions with transitioning with Barbara and how they have overcome. So we'll be right back here on WHMB 40. Stay tuned for a great segment coming up.
I'm Danny Wayne Beamer, Program Manager of the Elder Blind Program at the Will Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. I introduced the NFB Newsline to seniors in 13 southwestern counties in Indiana. I also utilize the NFB Newsline for my radio station public affairs shows. The NFB Newsline. Experience it today.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
Thousands of Indiana residents feel isolated from the world due to vision problems. Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm blind. I read Stars and Stripes on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline. You're back with us here on WHMB 40, and we're having great conversation with Navy veteran Brian Clark and his wife here. And she hasn't had much to say, but she's got a lot to say, and you might want to listen. So, Brian, we were talking about the training centers for the blinded veterans. But we also have training centers with the National Federation of the Blind. We have 3 training centers throughout the country here in the United States. So do you want to talk about what you think about those centers, what you've heard about them? Or you mentioned Mr. Higdon went there as well.
Yeah. Going to one of those centers is kind of like going to college. It's kind of like college-level blind training. I think they spend up to 9 months there, and they really, really challenge you in a lot of different areas. Really establish that you can live independently and give you a lot of confidence to do a lot of things that you didn't think that you could do before. It's my understanding that mobility is a big part of it.
It's a big part.
They do a lot of drop-offs where they just kind of drop you in the middle of town and say, okay, get home. And while that sounds very terrifying at first, it teaches you to use all your senses. You need to listen and feel the sun direction and feel the way the wind's blowing and things like that. And I think it just gives you a lot of confidence to do a lot of things that you didn't think you could do before.
It really does, because oftentimes we learn that with orientation and mobility, you have to get lost to be found or to find your way, because that's part of what we have to learn to do. as for our independence with orientation and mobility. As President Brown of Indiana states, your environment might change, but your cane skills remain the same in the senses that you have. So that goes with you throughout your life. That's pretty much paramount. And spouses can come to those centers, or you can go to, how does that work? You recall?
Well, I know when I was up at the Hines facility that they had a couple of family days where Barb came up and they have almost like a Ronald McDonald House up there where she was able to come up and stay for a couple of days for free. And then she attended, she went to the rehab center and did some stuff. Barb, would you like to kind of share one of your favorite memories from your attendance up there?
One of my favorite memories was they took me into the living skills class and they asked me to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they blindfolded me, and I thought a very simple task would come out of it, but by the time I was finished, I had peanut butter all over my clothes, all over the tray. I think I had peanut butter in the jelly. It was fun, but it was eye-opening to see that a simple task it's really difficult for blind people, and it explains why sometimes my husband will slow down and do a task because he needs to concentrate more than just by memory. So from that, you ascertained a little bit. So I know that it's not an easy thing for you as a wife to see your spouse losing his sight and all the transitioning and turmoil that he had to go through, because it impacts you as well. Share really just a tad bit on initially, maybe in the kitchen, maybe in the bathroom, maybe in the house somewhere, or in the grocery store. You just wondered about the direction of life with you and your husband. A big thing in our house was the kitchen, the way it was laid out, making sure if you put the milk in the fridge, you have to make sure you put it in the exact same spot, so your husband doesn't grab the milk and put it in his glass and maybe grab the orange juice thinking it's the milk and pouring it into his cereal. I've done that before. It tastes good too, It was an eye-opener for me to just know that everything in my kitchen now has to have an exact place, and kind of a little bit of safety, not leaving maybe a knife in the dishwasher the wrong way. Just making sure that it's accessible for Brian and also safe. Yeah, because I know Brian, like we say, sometimes we tap our toes. A lot of times, Florence, you know about all of this. Yes, tapping your toe or not using your skills properly that you are taught to use, your protective skills. And instead of having, like, you drop a towel, instead of just going automatically reaching down, you at least got to think about, okay, I'm not going down there until I think about what's in my way, because I'm about tired of bumping this head, or tapping this toe or knee or something. So there's skills that we learn being blind to where, if later on, if you put the milk in a different spot, you can find the milk in a different spot. It doesn't be as aggravating. So we're going to take us a short pause, and we'll be right back to end this segment of our show, and we'll be coming back with part 2 next week with Brian and Barb, and we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about how it is to really transition, some of the agonies of overcoming the situation of your spouse losing their sight. We'll be right back here on WHMB 40.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine.
Dad, you read Jerusalem Post, too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
As I travel the nation, I read NFB Newsline.
I live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and I listen to my local news on NFB Newsline.
As a student, I enjoy reading current events on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
Well, Brian and Barbara, we want to thank you once again for coming on to the show and sharing so much with our audience. Brian, please give us some parting shots.
Well, I would highly recommend that anybody, especially a veteran that's going through vision loss, reach out to people. There's a lot of people that have a lot of experience and are willing to help. The NFB is a great organization to get involved with. There's a lot of questions and answers that can be handled through NFB meetings and just getting to know some people that have lived life without vision for a long time. Additionally, I would highly recommend going to the VA, talking to the VIS coordinator, and using the available services through the VA. And I know that there's a lot of people that want to hang on to their usable vision, and I can't blame anybody for that. But it doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, your frustration or your anger or whatever, you're still going to be without vision. So you might as well try and get some help. It's nothing to be embarrassed with. You know, we're still humans and people, and we get all the same life experiences as people with vision. We just have to do some stuff a little bit differently from time to time.
Okay, and thank you for that. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for listening and looking at the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana Monthly Report. Have yourself a great day. Be good to yourself and be good to others.
The National Federation of the Blind Indiana Monthly Report. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 317-205-9226. That's 317-205-9226. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.